ลูกไหวได้ไงวะไป
We are talking Operation Undead from 2024, and this is a Thai zombie war movie. Now, before we go any further, I have to say it would help if you understand Thailand's involvement in World War II before watching this. I will give you a basic kind of summary because I do think it informs the film. So initially Thailand were actually neutral in World War II, and then in 1941 Japan invaded Thailand, and then Thailand joined the Axis, primarily supporting Japan. However, many in Thailand were actually against the Japanese, and as such they have a somewhat complicated history. So that is the kind of the real life setting for this movie, and it takes place in 1941. And in this movie, the Japanese actually have developed a bioweapon, being this kind of zombie virus that they want to test on Thai troops, basically. So that is what they do, and it focuses on this squad of Thai troops as they get infected with this kind of zombie virus. Now, this zombie virus is a little different from what you've seen because it's the people affected still have a degree of intelligence. They can still communicate, they can rationalize and things like that. So they are more intelligent zombies than the majority of sort of zombie films that you've seen. And the movie revolves around two brothers, one of which is initially infected with this virus, the other which isn't, and they are our two sort of central characters, and they are at sort of odds on all sorts of things, even before the invasion. And really, it focuses on this kind of squad of zombie troops and what they are gonna do, really. What will happen? You will have to watch the film and find out. So, does that sound interesting? Let's talk about it. What works in this movie's favour? I mean, it's a very unique concept to a degree, I would suggest. So if you want a zombie movie with a little bit of a difference, then I would maybe suggest checking this one out. Zombies as your protagonists, certainly a little against the norm there. And as I say, these zombies have some degree of intelligence. They can actually communicate perfectly fine, but they kind of are unpredictable and can kind of succumb to ravenous hunger and be sort of uncontrollable at times as well. So they're kind of variable, really, in how they act. And they, for example, want to somewhat protect their families because the Japanese, doing these experiments, want to kind of cover it up, and as such they want to dispose of anyone associated with these kind of zombie Thai soldiers, including their families. So, you know, in this instance, the zombies are framed as the protagonists, whilst the Japanese are the antagonists. Which makes for some, and even though they are officially allied with the Thailand government at this point. So, you know, there's some interesting stuff kind of going on. The other thing I would say as well is the makeup is sometimes really good. I mean, sometimes they play down the makeup, especially when it's like a heroic zombie, I have to say. But nonetheless, there are some pretty gruesome sort of VFX here, where we have zombies with partial heads missing and things like this, and you know, there's some pretty kind of gruesome stuff here. And obviously, you know, you have a horror movie in the horrors of war, so it's almost like a double jeopardy in a way. So certainly an interesting kind of setting, and there are, you know, obviously a large amount of cast here with different actors playing the Japanese and the obviously the Thai troops and stuff. So there's a large cast, so we have some fairly kind of larger scale kind of sequences here. And the movie feels like it has a sort of reasonable kind of production behind it. It tries to have some emotive moments, I think some of which work, some of which I don't think do, if I'm honest, and there's some of I think it kind of lingers on a little bit too much, but there are some, nonetheless, some emotional moments here. For example, we have a sequence where one of the zombie soldiers is trying to communicate with his wife and his young daughter, and, you know, he's just about kind of breaking through, but then the Japanese soldiers sort of shoot a harpoon to kind of spear this zombie, but he just happens to kind of like bend over at this point, and the harpoon sort of goes past him and ends up shooting his, like, and impaling his wife and child. So there is some kind of like sequences here that do have a little bit of an emotional kind of punch to it. It's a little bit of a double-edged sword. We'll come on to it again. But nonetheless, I think some of it is effective. The acting is always a little harder to tell when you're watching a foreign language movie, but, you know, everyone was kind of very emotive. There's lots of kind of screaming and shouting and emotive cries and stuff like that. So, you know, I have to say I thought that the acting seemed, you know, seems perfectly kind of fine to me. And, you know, it's some interesting characters. Even on the Japanese side, we have like somewhat of a kind of a capable commander who is at odds with, you know, his kind of lead scientists, for example. They both kind of want different things. So there's sort of different point of views in this movie. Again, so there is some kind of interesting sort of character work sort of going on as well. What doesn't work quite as well, as just I've touched on, I think some of these kind of emotional beats, it tries to be a little bit melodramatic at times, or at least that's how it comes across. And I think some of these kind of emotional beats outstay their welcome a little bit, and it ends up being a little bit trite at times, and a little bit soap opera-ish, where I just think it's like just eking these scenes out for a little bit too long. I think the movie is a little confusing, to be honest with you. The setup, like this is kind of why I've said this sort of setup at the beginning. If you're not even familiar with the Thailand's involvement in World War II, it might seem odd about what's going on, but even with that, I still feel in the actual plot itself, there's so many sort of like different point of views expressed in the movie. I think sometimes it gets a little convoluted at times and they're a little confused. VFX wise, I think some of the makeup is very good, but it's also let down by some kind of poor CGI. This sort of CGI fire that doesn't look particularly kind of strong. You know, and some sort of effects that they have with the kind of the zombies and stuff, again, just looks a little bit obviously kind of CGI at times. The zombies themselves, I've got to say, seem somewhat inconsistent. At times they seem perfectly kind of lucid when the script wants us to, you know, wants them to, but when it doesn't, they're kind of like wandering monsters, and it's like, well, what, you know, what's the difference? Why is it sometimes not others? I really didn't feel like the movie really kind of explained its mythology particularly well. It just seems to be whatever the script wants, that's what will happen at the kind of the time. I think ultimately, because of the somewhat confused plot, it gets a little bit kind of like outstays its welcome. It runs at nearly 2 hours, and because I didn't feel the plot particularly engaging, because it was a little bit choppy, my kind of attention was a little waning, I have to say. Overall, I think it has an interesting idea, and there are some aesthetic choices which are kind of quite fun, and it's certainly an original idea, but I do think it kind of doesn't quite succeed where it could have done. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Please do leave me your comments, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.